Before I introduce our speaker, who we know needs no introduction, but just so that we understand the city of Fresno and how big it is. How many of you are aware that the city of Fresno takes in 8 school districts? We all know Fresno, Central, Clovis. Who else? Sanger. Sanger, West Fresno, which is Washington Unified. Nope. Sanger, Fowler, Kings Canyon, Golden Valley to the north, and a little district called Orange Center. So takes in a wider area than probably we really think about. And the ramifications of that are very positive for all of us, as we know, as we do some regional things. Mayor Ashley Swearengin, her title the other day was A 40-Year Journey to a Thriving Community. And, you know, Linda Gleason and I liked one particular quote that she had, and she read. So I want to read this to you. She said, "I could sense who we were becoming as a city, and that there was just enough of a change in our mindset, enough dissatisfaction with the status quo, and hunger for change, and enough people mobilized in our community, that if we added the unwavering focus and undeniable determination from City Hall to the equation, that things could in fact be different this time. That talk would turn to action, and action to results." And I think as we look at the work of TCM, and we look at the work of probably one of the most exciting initiatives in Fresno County, which is led by this mayor, called Cradle to Career, which I think those of us that have been involved in that know it will be one of her finest legacies when she leaves. This is a person that politics doesn't matter. Politics doesn't matter. And she's proven that time and time again during time. She's a person of high moral, ethical character. A leader who has demonstrated she cares about all citizens, all portions of the city of Fresno, as well as the region, because not only is Fresno a leader in the state of California, but it impacts all of us out in the rural areas. It does. What the city of Fresno does and what this mayor does positively influences the other areas in this region. She's a leader who clearly has vision and a passion and a commitment to move the work forward, not just talk. If you've ever met with Ashley Swearengin or been on a committee, you know one thing. There's not going to be a lot of talk. And if there is talk, it's going to be, okay, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? So when you're in a meeting with, you have to come with the mindset that we're going to talk, but what are we going to do? End of the day, what are we going to do? And you have to appreciate that in a leader. She understands that many in our community are struggling. And what as public agencies, nonprofits, and businesses, what can we do together to enhance the quality of life and job creation? More importantly for us as TCM, Cradle to Career, she's a leader who understands early education. And we're the choir, right? We're preaching to the choir. But I've been in meetings. This is a leader who clearly understands the value of early education, who clearly understands that our kids deserve nothing but the best, and the only way it's going to get done is if we do it together. And her message has been loud and clear. She's a creative problem solver, outside the box thinker. I think we've all been very fortunate that she's got about 6 months left of her 8 year that she has been. We've been fortunate to have her as a mayor. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mayor Ashley Swearengin.
Good morning. Well, thank you so much. That was so very generous and a good way to start off a Friday. I'm excited to be here with you guys, and I'm especially excited because when a session is titled The 40-Year Journey to a Thriving Community, you don't expect a lot of people to show up. There are not many people who are like, yeah, sign me up for 40 years of hard work, but look at all of you, you're here. So that's great, and it's going to be a good time here together this morning. Before I jump into the things that I wanted to share with you, I have a couple of goodies here that I'd like to give away. So first of all, of course, I am wearing my Can't Stop Fresno shirt, which was inspired by the music video. We handed these out at State of the City on Wednesday, and I have one of these for Miss Linda. Come on up, Linda. Where are you? Where'd she go? There you are. Her very own Can't Stop Fresno. It's a little wrinkled. Sorry about that. Okay. Yep.
So sweet.
Okay. And then... And I think I'm going to have to tweet this out, but I have decided, and this was sort of the joke at State of the City, one of my favorite things, maybe my favorite thing about being mayor of Fresno is that I've developed the most amazing Fresno t-shirt collection. Because everybody gives you really cool Fresno t-shirts, right? And I'm kind of joking, but I'm also kind of serious. Like seeing little stores like Root in downtown on Fulton Street, and seeing artists start to really cultivate this message of Fresno and authentic in a really cool and kind of hip way, and then blasting it on a t-shirt, I think is pretty special. And so I have at least 20 very amazing Fresno t-shirts. So I think this next week I'm going to craft a resolution that declares that every Friday in Fresno between now and the end of the calendar year is Fresno T-shirt Friday. And I'm going to encourage people to go out and buy, it could be Fresno State, it could be Fresno, whatever. You can go to Gazebo Gardens or Root or any one of a number of local stores and start getting your collect. We can support local businesses this way and all of that. So I want to help somebody else kick off their Fresno t-shirt collection. I got one right here. So, okay, so whoever runs up here fastest and gets this shirt, it's yours. Go, go, go. Who's going to get it? Go. Okay, there you go. Yay. And I think, I know Root did these for us, and Community Medical Centers was the sponsor of these. So this is my other little goodie. I'll just leave this up here, but amazing peaches and nectarines from Gorawan Farms, just picked. These are so beautiful. If you're planning your, Father's Day, peach pie, something like that, you guys can come up here and pick these up on the way out. So anyway, but yes, that I think we need to get Root to make a bunch of these. So if you didn't get your shirt this morning, you can go down and buy one. All right, so I have about 20 minutes or so to express to you what I see that's happened in our community over the last 20 years and what I think needs to happen and is going to happen in the next 20 years. So that's about 30 seconds per year. And that's likely not going to happen. So I'll have to abbreviate. But what I wanted to do is just kind of set up a framework, first of all, and then walk you through really what I've been seeing over the last 20 years, because it's incredible. You guys are very much a part of what I think has been this positive transformation in Fresno. And the reality is we still have a lot of work to do. And so probably Linda could have also titled this session, the subtitle of the 40-year journey to a thriving community could have been, and the good news is we're already 20 years in. So it's not like we're at a dead start right now and have 40 years ahead of us. Some pretty remarkable things have been going on over the last couple decades. So I want to start with a framework that actually the Fresno Business Council really helped to nail down, and this was after about, probably 10, 15 years of their journey into this process. And how many of you have heard about the 4 spheres that Deb Nankiville has talked about? Okay, so sometimes when that hits you, and if you don't have context, you're like, what are all these bubbles, and I don't get this, but it really is important, because our goal and our aim, when I say our, community leaders, our civic sector, today obviously our focus is on children, but our aim is entire transformation of Fresno, every facet, every nook, every cranny, every sector, every person. Literally, I'm talking about a blanket of transformation that covers 110 square mile city and 550,000 people in the city. And of course, total impacts across the county and all of central San Joaquin Valley. So I kind of go in and out of my jurisdictional boundaries, but I don't mean to be limited to just the city of Fresno and much of what I'm going to talk about today. So greater Fresno region, now at that point you're talking 900,000, 1 million people. So if our aim is complete and total transformation, everything that's old is new, completely flipping on its head the past and seeing a different future, that's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of territory and a lot of jurisdiction. And so it helps to understand, kind of organize in your mind, well, how do we connect as a community? What is the sort of organization of society, not to be too heady about this? And the Business Council really helped to kind of nail this down. Well, look, we need to think about it in 4 ways. And if you've seen their diagram, they've got sort of 3 concentric circles, and they've got 1 big circle that surrounds that. And if I were just a little bit ahead of my game, I would have brought you a slide or something. But those 3 interlocking circles in the middle really are the major domains of community, and they are the economy, number 1. Number 2, all things human stuff, human services, education, all of the entities and the networks and the structures that connect people and impact people, okay? So we have kind of the business side, the people side, and then they identify the third as infrastructure, right? And obviously infrastructure is the foundation for both of the other 2. And I take a very kind of brick and mortar view of that infrastructure being roads and highways and school buildings and street lights and trails and parks and public facilities and all, like actually that sort of built environment sort of thing. So those are kind of the 3 big chunks of things in the middle, and then determining the future and either the success or the failure of each of those main domains, the Business Council argues is this whole thing that wraps around the entire all of those 3 circles that they call steward leadership and civic engagement and political culture. All right, so in other words, our corporate decision-making entities. Elected officials are the most visible aspect of that, but it really deals with, everything from nonprofit boards and, school boards and, across the board sort of leadership and the political culture. And when I say political, I mean lowercase p. I'm not talking about partisan politics, but I'm talking about the will of the community and what we value together and how we make decisions. So if we're trying to transform our community, that means we're trying to transform each of those 4 things. And if you don't start to move the needle in a big way on the civic environment and the political culture, there's very little hope to see positive, results-driven action in the other 3, the economy, human services, and people, and infrastructure. And when I think back, my own journey with this work began in, I would call it 1998. So I'm almost 20 years in. When I consider what the political culture was like 18 years ago and the way decisions were being made and what we valued and what we were aiming for to today, night and day difference, night and day. So I want to just tell you kind of about that journey for me over the last 18 years, what I've seen, the movement I've seen, and how it's really set us up for this moment today. And I will admit that everything I've experienced is what only I've experienced. And it's going to sound like, if you weren't over there hanging out in that group that was doing that stuff, then it didn't matter. It wasn't. I'm just telling you my personal journey, okay, and what I've seen. But there's been so many other things that were going on at the same time. Right? So please don't in any way think I'm trying to be exclusive, but I'm just kind of telling you my own story. Janelle has been a part of all of this from the very beginning. Literally, I could tell you the first day I met Janelle, and she was right in the middle of all this. All right, so starting back 18, 20 years ago, this was kind of the big pieces that were moving, is Fresno State had a relatively new president, a guy named John Welty. And at the same time, the Fresno Business Council had hired this good government advocate, this lady named Deb Nankivil. And Deb parachuted into Fresno from from Minnesota, where she had been like the multi-state leader for Common Cause, which is an organization that pushes good government reform all over the country, and she headed up a couple of states worth of efforts on that. So she came with a strong sort of perspective on community and leadership and good government and all of that. So she got dropped in. And then there was John Welty. Well, at some point, those stars collided, and they started working together. And I remember hearing John Welty talk about coming from, I think it was from the Pennsylvania area, in a place where there were just a lot of publicly funded higher education institutions. And education was very much a key part of the fabric of the culture from the region of the country that he came to. And if you caught him in kind of a quiet moment, and when the camera wasn't rolling like it is on me right now, now he's retired so I could say these sorts of things, you know, behind closed doors, in those early years, he would say things like, Fresno doesn't value education. We don't really have a value for every person, every kid, you know, every, 3-year-old to adult worker. Like, we're not committed as a community to making sure that every person in our region, our footprint, has access to education. Like, and I remember thinking, God, that's weird, because I sort of thought, I just sort of assumed we did. And, but that was his insight. And he came from a part of the country where university and higher education was very much leading the charge on regional economic development and really sort of charting the future for that particular location. And Fresno State at that time was pretty isolated. You know, my husband went to Fresno State in 1985. I was there from undergrad 90 to 94. And, you know, even as college students, and my husband Paul commented on this, you know, Fresno State was very much just as long as we're kind of okay, it doesn't matter what's going on around us, as long as we're meeting our fundraising goals for sports or you know, wow, how much has changed, right? Now leading the nation in community engagement is Fresno State. So anyway, so back then, John Welty started breaking down those walls. Deb Nankivell was in the business community sort of saying, gosh, guys, you know, it's really not okay that single interest groups are literally like buying off elected officials and, you know, calling the shots from the council chambers. Like, no, vote no. Oh, okay, vote no. I mean, these sorts of things were very rampant in Fresno, and it was okay. It was the status quo. At the same time, by the mid to late 90s, I mean, by that point, I don't recall that there were specific studies and measures that were coming out, but not that much longer, by 2005, you know, the census data was showing we had the highest concentration of poverty of any other large city in the United States. So in 1998, you got to figure it was pretty bad, because we didn't just wake up in 2005 and that happened. It was already pretty bad in 1998. And it was like there was no sense of where we were on the planet and what was going on around us. Like, blinders had really cloaked, I think, the eyes of sort of the civic leadership set in the greater Fresno area. And I remember, when I dropped in on this, I had I was just finishing my MBA at Fresno State, and I went to work for the nonprofit business incubator, Central Valley Business Incubator, and so I'm now kind of hanging out with these people. And I remember going, you know, at that time I was youngish, very young, yes, for sure young. And I remember going to meetings like, I don't know, business groups and that sort of thing, various breakfast forums and all of that. And I remember a guy from Fresno State. He was a young economist. He's no longer at Fresno State, but I remember him showing up and giving a presentation. I think it was a Chamber of Commerce event. And he was talking about chronic double-digit unemployment in Fresno. And I'm thinking, I just finished my MBA, and I'm thinking, I want like a career in Fresno. I want to be in a thriving business community. And he's reporting on all these statistics of, you know, double-digit unemployment and, you know, lack of a GDP growth and all this kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, what kind of a future am I going to have if our economy is so depressed? And this man is releasing all this information to nothing but like a great big yawn from the audience. And I remember being in that session, and even one person stood up from the ag sector and started arguing against the data that was being presented. And arguing, you know, we're an ag economy and this is just the way it goes, and, you know, blah, and arguing so hard for essentially status quo. And I remember thinking, man, this is weird. There's got to be we got to get to the bottom of why we at that point probably had in the 1990s, for sure by the 1980s, early 1980s, if not before. I think the state tracks the data back about 30 years. And every year that's of information that's available online, annual double-digit unemployment with like maybe one or two exceptions when it went down to 9%. So that was our status quo, and the culture of the community at the time was like, yeah, it's ag economy, that's the way it goes, Okay, that's where we started. People started finding each other who were like having sort of kind of afraid to have really open conversations, because you could definitely get like shamed and shunned if you were too much of a rabble-rouser and too much of a like, hey, things need to change here. There were a few of those voices, and they were sort of ostracized. Oh, that's just so-and-so. They're liberal, whatever. They're radical, so they were tolerated, but they certainly were in no way, those voices were not influential. And anyway, so we started in the business community with, the Business Council and Dick Johansson and a number of those folks saying like, yeah, maybe it's not okay. Maybe like the human condition in Fresno is actually negatively impacting our bottom lines as business people. And maybe, we should kind of take an enlightened self-interest sort of view of this. And I'm not totally altruistic here, because I actually am a business person. I'm trying to make money and grow my family business or whatever, but I'm sort of getting the connection that maybe what's going on in community is having a direct effect on my bottom line. And so maybe I ought to start arguing for and working towards some sort of a shift here. So that was just beginning to start back in those days. Early partnerships and early work that kind of came out of those conversations, as I mentioned, the Central Valley Business Incubator, where Janelle and I first met, and Tim Stearns was obviously a big part of that, and starting to say, look, even if people don't start their own businesses, ultimately we have to empower people. The message of entrepreneurship from the private sector standpoint is absolutely transformational for a community. If you teach a fifth grader that he or she could start their own business, and they could write, a little business plan and do a quick little website and, go door to door and sell some products, or say, I'll clean your driveway, or I'll cut your, if we start infusing people with a message of empowerment, anytime you hear the word entrepreneurship, just replace it with the word empowerment. If we start going there, it's not just about, and maybe some businesses will start and grow and create jobs and provide economic opportunity, although that's really huge, but it's transformational for how we see each other as a community and how all of our public institutions work, and ultimately how these individual citizens grow up and how they see their future. So we went hard after entrepreneurship, which was sort of in that economic bucket. From there, a couple of years in, 1998 to about 2000, of course you guys will remember that the IT expansion, the vast deployment of information technology was sweeping California, the nation, and the world. It was the big tech bubble. You guys remember that? And some economists have looked back on that time and said it was the greatest economic expansion in 100 years, because all of these different businesses and industries, it wasn't just an IT thing. Of course, there was huge growth because of that. But then the deployment of that information technology and infrastructure across every sector and every industry was just pushing this massive, massive bubble, which then turned into the dot-com bubble and all that sort of thing. So all of this is happening around us, and we're down in Fresno thinking like, yeah, this is it. The economic wave is coming. Get your boogie boards. We're going for a ride. We're going to see jobs. We're going to see people get work. We're going to see unemployment go down and poverty levels go down and incomes go up. Yeah. And none of that happened. So by the early 2000s, of course, 9/11 happens, and literally the weekend after 9/11, in fact, you guys remember 9/11, was that a Tuesday? The attacks hit on a Tuesday? So that Friday, the same group who had put together this entrepreneurship initiative and kind of this Fresno State Business Council, hey, maybe we should actually change our community and it'll benefit everybody, that coalition of people was forming something called the Fresno Area Collaborative Regional Initiative. We love acronyms. We're great at naming civic things, right? We're much better at it now, like the children's movement. Boom, much better. Back then it was the Fresno Area Collaborative Regional Initiative, which nobody could explain. Anyway, so we had planned this weekend retreat at Waxahachie Village in the Sequoias. And we had picked 100 people who were not elected officials. In fact, we had a strict no elect, because the political culture was so toxic that the second that entered the room, everything turned into power about status quo, essentially, and who, which powerful interest was going to win the arm wrestle that day. And it was not in any way an enlightened sort of civic leadership group. So we said no electeds. Number one, we had private business people, and we had some pretty awesome civic entrepreneurs who were agency heads at that time. We picked 100 people. We were going off to the woods to plan out this strategic initiative for transforming our community. But 9/11 happened on the Tuesday before that. So I'll never forget, I was staffing this work, by the way, because at that point I'd gone over to Fresno State to be the head of the Office of Community and Economic Development and kind of be the host to this work. So all of us who were planning the retreat got together the next day to say, what are we going to do? Are we going to still go forward with this retreat? Literally, some people were stranded in airports across the country. I mean, it was you all remember what that was like. And Ken Newby, if you know Ken Newby, at the time managing partner of Deloitte, and a Vietnam vet, combat Vietnam vet. And he's sitting in the room, and Deb and I are, like, what do we do? Maybe we should cancel. And Ken says, we are not canceling. We are not letting these people stop the work of our community. We are going forward, and we are going to have this retreat. And that was, boom, it. We're done. We're going. And a very pivotal decision. So we all went off that weekend on this retreat, and I'm going to have to fast forward because I'm 2 years into my 20-year talk, and I think I'm down to maybe 8 or 9 minutes left. So, and I'm going to wrap all this up and make a couple of key points here in a second. So we go off to this retreat. We have great weekend brainstorming. We write up action plans in 5 key areas: knowledge workers and workforce development, K-12 education, technology infrastructure, economic development, and then we had an initiative called Creating a Culture of Innovation. And went back down the hill and spent a couple of years working on implementation of those plans. And again, still kind of working with a group of people that, there was criticism at the time that, you guys are running off and doing this exclusive stuff and you're leaving out people. And it was, what, we kind of were. I mean, that was not an unfair criticism. However, there was a reason for it. We were looking for the people who were hungry for change and who had the DNA of being willing to do whatever it took to transform. And so we kind of had to close ranks a little bit to create a space where people who wanted to see things differently and act differently could, in fact, without getting dragged into status quo. So anyway, we worked on the Collaborative Regional Initiative for a couple of years. It reminds me a lot of the children's movement, and only in a different domain, a little more focused on infrastructure and the economy. We did, however, have a human services task force that seeded a lot of very interesting things that you could probably trace the DNA of this group back in some ways to that work. But anyway, worked on that for a couple years, got to the point where we're like, okay, we've pushed it about as far as we can, just with our own sort of 100 civic entrepreneurs gathering quarterly and having fun and working hard and trying to inspire change in these different ways. We need to get to the next level. We actually do need to engage elected officials at this point. All right, Mayor Autry was the mayor. He was working at the time with Pete Weber, retired corporate executive who had plugged in through Allen, not through the CRI, very hard-charging, taskmaster, get-it-done kind of amazing guy. And they wanted to do a big jobs initiative and put together a plan to create the number of jobs needed to lower Fresno's unemployment to at or about the state average. Well, that became the Fresno Regional Jobs Initiative. And that was sort of the marriage between those of us who were these secret civic entrepreneurs off to the side, don't tell anybody, but we're really trying to change everything at Fresno. And if they find out, they'll try to stop us. So shh. Like that was that group. And then we had the very public and visible, Alan Autry and Lynn Ashbeck was mayor of Clovis at the time, and Juan Arambula was the chair of the county board. And so those three came together, and we heard they're going to do this big jobs initiative, and we're like, oh no, we have to tell them what to do because they don't know by themselves. So we had already written up all these plans of stuff that related to moving the economy. So we took our research, our work, and we walked it over to them. We're like, hey, could you make your big initiative about all this stuff we've already been doing? They're like, yeah, this is great. We need content. Like, we can create the forum, but we need content. So we merged those two things, and that became the Regional Jobs Initiative, all right? So we did 5 years of that. And a lot of stuff going on, 40 specific initiatives, very focused on the economy and infrastructure, but still had a little bit of a focus on human services. We just couldn't quite get our arms around that, however. So now I'm really skipping years and years. So then we figured, I thought, you know what? We got to take City Hall. We got a foundation. We know what needs to be done. You know, we actually need to take the institutions. And at this point, there was already significant change starting to happen at Fresno Unified. There were other key leaders who had been recruited and, you know, different major public agency heads. And there was already this sort of, like, the door was open. And we saw, like, okay, City Hall for 8 years, we could probably get done more with direct authority and jurisdiction over the issues that City Hall has jurisdiction over. Like, that's a shortcut. Instead of just constantly always working on the outside of the institutions, like, that's a shortcut. Let's get in there. Let's use the power of City Hall for 8 years. We'll get there faster. So you kind of know how that went. And to be honest with you, many of the things that have now happened that we've worked on at City Hall were quite literally out of the blueprint of the Regional Jobs Initiative, the infrastructure piece, and the economic development piece. All right? Nothing was created from scratch. It was all stuff that had already been plotted out, thought about, analyzed. And so when we walked in, now there's a lot of other stuff that had to be done, but we had a pretty clear path to, this is what we're going to use this office for the next 8 years. So, but as I mentioned, we had never really gotten our arms around human services, kind of under the county domain. City-county people have historically not talked very much or very well together, and it's like, we just don't really know how to penetrate that world. But then, some years ago, all of a sudden, here comes this children's movement. In fact, I think it was when I was running in 2008, when did you guys really start convening in? 10, right, okay, 10, 11. So now I'm mayor and I'm, doing mayor stuff and economy and infrastructure, and I see what's happening with Kendra and Linda and Kathy Huerta and amazing people that were like mobilizing around this human services area, which none of us on the business and the economy side could ever figure out what to do with. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, there it is. There is the spark, the collaboration, the drive. It had all the same DNA of all these other efforts, but just in this different domain. So now I'm like, wow, all of these three things are actually coming together, and it's why I'm so enthusiastic about the children's movement, which really in large measure helped birth the Cradle to Career, which brings together everything, right? Pre-birth all the way through, continuing education and sort of every facet of human services. So now, while I'm not a driver, and the superintendent was generous to say that I'm leading it, I'm not. Unless you're saying I'm the lead cheerleader. And if that's the case, then yes, I am. Because I so value that this piece is the third and the last big piece to lock in on this otherwise, bigger platform of community transformation. So hooray, right? We're finally at this point where all this is coming together. Now, let me try to land this plane. So,
it's foggy out. Sorry, gotta circle some more.
I know, right? Oh, yeah. Well, I have no problem circling. So a couple of, to me, just lessons learned. Like, first of all, what started all of this, in my view, is we as a community, and none of us at the time were in any formal position of authority or leadership. Nobody asked, at that point, nobody asked us to be in charge. We had assigned ourselves, okay? And we were hungry for change. And being hungry for change is a pretty miserable state to be in, but it is so very necessary. And particularly because we were dealing with decades and decades of status quo that were not working well for the vast majority of the people of our community. And the lights had to go off. And we had to really, really get in touch with the desperation of the circumstances of our city and our valley. We had to go down into the pit, really, and be there and feel it and acknowledge it and contemplate it and be like, and consider how big of a lift it would be to change those things, we had to feel very, very small and incapable and insufficient and desperate. We had to get really, really desperate. And we got there. And when I realized that we had really gotten to that point of desperation was in 2005, when the Katrina report came out. After Katrina, the Brookings Institution report, Katrina's Window is what it was called. And it just took census data and it looked at the concentration of poverty, and Fresno was the number one. That was 2005 when that came out. And of course, at that point, we were publicly leading the Regional Jobs Initiative. There was media coverage of this report coming out, and I remember being interviewed about that report, and I remember talking with business and civic leaders, again, the Ken Newbys of the world, and John Welty, and Alan Perot, and people like that, Deb Nankivil. And you know what? Their response, and particularly I remember Ken's, their heart response to that news was so powerful. It was, oh my God, we knew it was bad. We didn't know it was that bad. This is why we're doing what we're doing. And the report didn't devastate us because we were already in the trenches trying to sort these things out. But the heart response was so different. I remember probably a decade before that, some economic report came out. I don't remember what it was. Or it was an LA Times story. Probably Mark Arax wrote it. I love Mark Arax. He's been a truth teller for a long time. And just people weren't hearing it. But there was some negative coverage of Fresno in like the 1990s. I mean, it happens a lot. But anyway, and I remember as a young business professional in the community, the response was, that's not true. We're fine. They just don't know how great it is to be here in Fresno. We need to do a better job of marketing. Let's raise money to do a marketing campaign. You guys remember those days? Those were the 90s. And it's not that it was inappropriate to say, hey, let's promote our strengths. I mean, I get that. But the heart attitude was total lack of understanding and denial of what was going on in our community. And in the night, if you think about it, if we had stopped the avalanche sooner, I mean, every decade that's gone by, it's harder and harder and harder to turn things around. So if we'd been at it in the 90s, well, maybe we'd be 30 years in today instead of 20 years in. But anyway, so the heart attitude changed. We got hungry. We got desperate. And that was evident to me by 2005. From there, and let me just say one more thing about that. When you're really, really desperate, guess what happens? You let go of your preconceived ideas about how things are supposed to be. You let go of your partisan labels. You let go of, my agency's going to get the win. No, it's my grant. My grant. You let go of that. You let go of all of the junk that's in the system that keeps the civic sector from being as efficient and effective as it can and needs to be. You let go of that. And you actually start to do better as a result, get better results. And then that's fuel in the tank to keep going, right? So getting to the place of hunger and desperation. Now when I travel around and I have the occasion to just kind of engage other community leaders, other mayors, and that kind of thing, particularly in the San Joaquin Valley, when I sit in civic sessions with other people in other communities, that's what I'm listening for. Are these people desperate yet? And I can tell you, in some places in the valley, they are. And in other places, they're not. And their indicators are getting worse and worse and worse. I'm not going to name names. It's just my little humble opinion. But I'm just telling, if anybody asks my opinion or asks for help for me to be an advisor in other parts of the valley or the state or whatever, that's the first test for me. Really, are you desperate enough to make friends with your enemies? Because if you're not, then you're not ready. Number one, hungry for change. Number two, so we started realizing that we really had to take a long-term view. And I've only recently been telling Fresno that it's a 40-year journey. I only started saying that a couple years ago. You can't say that when you're at year one. It's kind of like a capital campaign, you know, when Fresno State did the big capital campaign. You don't come out and say, we're raising $250 million, and who's going to be the first dollar? You get the first big gift or the first $50 million committed, and then you go, yeah, we're $50 million into a $250 million campaign. It's the same thing with a public communication, civic effort. I didn't feel safe telling Fresnans that we had a 40-year journey until we were 20 years in. I've only just started saying that because we really didn't have an appetite as a community in the political arena. You know, any mayor that's, you know, stands up and says, well, here's the, you know, the good news is I'm the right person for the job. The bad news is, you know, I've got the first 8 years of a 40-year leg. I mean, people will kick you off the stage. They want to know, you're going to turn it around tomorrow, right? Yeah, absolutely. We'll turn it around tomorrow. And we're going to be done with all this tomorrow. So it's been a process. And so much of what, you know, by taking on really big, hard, complicated things like what you're doing here, you are developing a muscle in the civic arena to set your sights on real change, deep issues, and we're not stopping till they're all the way done. And if that means it's 20 years, it's 20 years. And maybe I'm here for 8 or 10 of those years, but I've got my sights set on the end result. And I don't care how long it's gonna take. And it forces you as a leadership group to already be thinking about who are we raising up next to hand off to, because we're not gonna finish this. And it's that sort of leadership development that is required to turn around the 5th largest city of California. And there are a lot of times when I look back over the last 20, 30, 40 years in Fresno where leadership was not focused on the long term and the big, and therefore there was no cultivation of the next generation of leaders. And we are not making that same mistake again, okay? And talking about long term and big is a part of that. So having a long-term view. And then it helps, well, I'll stop with that. So how do you deal with, oh my gosh, I thought this was a 2-year assignment, you know. The mayor's telling me I got to be here for another 20. I'm tired. I can't do that. How do you deal with the tension of what we're taking on is so big and we will stop at nothing short of the big? How do you live every day knowing that it's such a long, hard journey and a lift? Well, I've learned a few tips along the way. And I'll just share 2 of them with you, and then I'm going to wrap up. By the way, battery on my watch died like 2 days ago, so I have no idea what time it is. Okay, so, and I am okay if you guys are okay, but if you need to go, I understand. Okay, so a couple tips, all right? You have to celebrate. You have to have fun, and you have to look at the whole picture. And this is really important in the government world, because the DNA of government is that money flows where there is need. And so we, for decades and decades, have learned to speak about deficiencies and challenges and poverty and strife and all the bad. And I think there was a season for that. That is part of what helped us get hungry and desperate. There was a time when we really needed to have our eyes completely opened and have to sit and stew in the worst of the worst conditions, okay? There was a time for that, right? So hear me in saying that. And if you don't get there, if you don't get to that desperation, you can't get to the celebration part, because you don't want to get there too soon and risk masking the issues, okay? It's like when your doctor tells you, if you're in pain, don't take painkiller because you'll mask the pain. I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm not going to stop taking painkiller. But anyway, we've walked through that time, okay? So here's the deal. When you're dealing with huge deficits, huge need, and no way near enough resource to really get where you want to go, you have to celebrate wins, big and little. You have to be focused on the positive. And here's the way I express this too. And it's hard for the public sometimes because they feel like, oh, you're not acknowledging the problems. I said at State of the City on Wednesday, our crime rates are lower in 2015 than they were in 2006. How many of you felt like in the primary campaign that it was like a war zone in 1985 in Fresno? Do you know that's just flat out not true? We had 2,500 fewer victims of crime in 2015 with fewer police officers than we did in 2006 with an all-time high staffing level.
We need to keep the staffing lower, and then crime goes down.
That's exactly what Jackie Parks is afraid you will conclude as the public if we are just being factual about things. Okay, so anyway, so the public worries that if you're talking about things too positively, that maybe you're not in touch with the challenges. So here's what I always tell people in the private sector and in just the public. If you're running a business, let's say you're the CEO of a business, you're having your weekly staff meeting. Do you say to your staff, okay, I want everybody to show up Monday morning, get your reports ready, and I only want you to bring me the bad news. Don't tell me anything that's good that's going on. Don't tell me anything about any division or unit within our business that is thriving and profitable. I only want to have a bad news meeting. How many of you think that business would ever go anywhere or be successful? Hell no. In the private sector, you say, all right, I want the full picture. I want good and bad. Where are we strong? Where are we weak? How do we leverage our strengths to deal with our weaknesses? Where we're weak, do we sell it off or do we invest and fix it? I mean, it's the whole picture, good and bad. So the good is not to mask the bad. The good is to help you figure out how you leverage it to go after the bad. Do you get that? So when you're walking out a 40-year journey that we're now 20 years into, and you're dealing with some of the worst and most challenging issues in all of America, you have to equally every day have a steady diet of the need and the strength. Okay? So that's why we danced. That's why we do funny t-shirts. That's why almost all that I talk about, for sure publicly, and frankly, much of my closed-door meetings is strength and what's working, all right? Second thing I want to mention, then I'm going to wrap. And this is something I know that is really a part of the DNA of this group and of the Cradle to Career. We have to have a standard of excellence in everything we do. Excellence, okay? Public sector, private sector, little things, big things. And I feel we have upped the game in Fresno. Our standards are so much higher today. All right? Being so data-based and driven as a part of Cradle to Career, that's a measure of excellence. Okay? Excellence and execution in everything we do. A lot of times in the public sector, we get points for trying. And that's all the public really holds us accountable for. Well, we tried really hard. Look at all this evidence that how hard we tried. We have to hold ourselves accountable for results. And even if the public isn't there yet. I mean, just it has to come from us. It's about excellence and execution, and we do not stop until every facet of our work, we can say, yep, there it is. There's excellent management, excellent communication, excellent delivery of service, excellence, 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 all the time. That's why I'm such a stickler about how we visually present the image of Fresno. When you come in my office, you will see beautiful pictures of things in our community. Everything we touch to the best of our ability, and we fall short a lot, but it is our goal. Everything you touch that has Fresno, I want it to be as beautiful as the nectarines in that box. I want our artists to lead the charge in expressing the heart of our community. I mean, the fact that we now are seeing such excellence in the performing arts and the visual arts, do you know that's not just a nice to have and oh, isn't that cute? We have some funky little artists. Like, they are the forerunners. They reach in and tap the heart, the soul of our community, and they express it to the world. So if you want to know what's going on in a community, you go find out what the artists are saying and doing and what they're performing and what they're expressing. And that'll tell you what's going on in that community. So look, I mean, this is going to sound silly, but look at this excellent video of people being fun and celebrating Fresno and dancing, and it's on Channel 30. Watch that video. The other one we did, State of the City, Johnny Soto did. It's called the Fresno, the Learned Astronomer. YouTube it. It's beautiful, and it's excellent. And the reason why we showed it at State of the City was because it was a local artist who went to Hollywood, came back home because he said, the artists here are doing their art in Fresno because they love it here. The art is connected to the place. And look at what he produced. It's gorgeous. Watch it. So excellence is key, and that's how you have to walk it out. It is a long haul, so you have to have fun, and you have to push yourself to excellence every single day. And all along the way, we celebrate these wins. But we can do that now because we're so anchored on what the target is, and it is the right target. So that's locked in, and we can't let anybody change that for us, and they won't. And that's how we spend the next 20 years together. Thank you.